Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind, Season 5. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. I've been a therapist and a professor since about 1997. And a little reminder that everything that I say when I watch this show is completely speculative based on very little information that is only presented to us by the cast and by the editors. But let's watch.
I don't know, maybe it's nerves. Maybe it's like seeing me for the first time. Maybe he was relying on me the whole time in the pods to make conversation. But like when I voiced it to him last night, he said, well, you can just talk. Like you can just talk. And that's not how a relationship works.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what we saw in the pods, because out of the pods, JP is like completely shut down. I was wondering if it was just the cameras. And then once the cameras are gone, he is more talkative with her. At least I was hoping that to be true. But it sounds like from Taylor, she's saying that even when the cameras aren't there, that he's not talking. And, you know, there's quiet people and then there's JP. JP on camera it's rude what he's doing. It's okay if you're not a talkative person, but he's treating Taylor like he doesn't like her, like he doesn't care about her. Now, a lot of people who are shy and have social anxiety, even with a partner, which he barely knows, of course, is not uncommon. It might sound strange that you could be shy and uptight around someone that, you know, this situation is kind of unique because you don't usually get engaged on a reality TV show in a couple or in 1 week. But I've treated clients, couples, and individuals who will talk about how even with their parents that they love and enjoy, or with in-laws that they also love and enjoy, or their own spouse, their own children, they will be shy and have a hard time feeling comfortable saying things. Obviously, this is a result of some sort of trauma, whether it's abuse growing up or having been bullied or ostracized, humiliated in school, that sort of thing. And there's a lot of different circumstances that can happen. One that we sometimes see on reality TV is that there will be someone who will immigrate to another country and they don't speak the language. And a lot of times kids are just thrown into school, and the idea is that, well, they'll figure it out eventually. And yeah, they do figure it out eventually, but there's 1, 2, or 3 years where the child is completely scared and has no idea what's happening and unsafe. You know, just imagine that you're a child, you're 7, and you can't even ask where the bathroom is. You don't know what is happening, and you're just alone and quiet, and people just learn to avoid you. So that can be one circumstance. But, you know, there are other circumstances like just regular bullying, that kind of stuff. And also oppression and bigotry, obviously. So I don't know if it's that with JP, or he doesn't like her, or he has some other thing. There's a lot of reasons why people will shut down. Maybe he has some kind of medical issue. I mean, I'm just throwing darts at the board here because I'm trying to figure out why JP, you know, it's just to get back to the medical issue. If you, particularly men, if you have a medical problem, you are taught to not be weak and to just put your head down and deal with it, you know, rub some dirt on it and walk it off. And I mean, no joke, in the 80s when I was playing football, I would have concussions and my friends, my teammates would have concussions, like bad concussions. And we would just play. There was no concern as long as there was no blood. And well, even if there was blood, as long as there was no broken bone, then you just kept playing. And I think about all the brain injuries that were happening, and every now and then I'm thinking, you know, if I'll forget something, and I wonder, is because you hear about these cases like Junior Seau of the San Diego Chargers, a linebacker like me who apparently suffered from repetitive concussion, repetitive brain injury that resulted in him apparently having depression and personality changes later in life and behavioral disturbances, and eventually he killed himself, if I remember right. And there are other cases, not only in American football, but also boxing along these lines. And I went through that. I was a running back and a linebacker, and those two positions probably have the most head-on collisions. I have a broken bone in my back, in my jaw. What else? Oh, I've had surgery on my arm a couple times, and yet I still love American football, and I wouldn't change a thing. As long as my brain is, mostly still intact, over the next 20 years, we'll see. But anyway, I don't recommend the game for your kids, honestly. Full stop. Mostly because of the brain and neck injuries that are possible. I could tell you stories of various. Anyway, point is that for us, we're taught men to just put our head down, and I wonder if JP was socialized that way. He certainly has some markers of that sort of socialization. And also, I'm just throwing darts at the board, but it's possible that maybe he has some kind of concern about his body, maybe a sexual thing. I don't know. But I've heard of people who will have that and they just shut down. They don't know what to do. They're scared. Is there some other personality thing going on? Does he hate her? I don't know. But when they first met in the hallway, it was awkward, but you're just like, well, those things happen. But it just keeps persisting. And I feel so bad for Taylor because she just keeps trying to get something going with him. I mean, watching this conversation, she's like, so, you going to take a shower today? He's like, yeah, I probably should. Yeah, something's going on there, right? And it doesn't bode well because at this phase for Taylor, it's a whole new beginning. It's a whole new relationship once you meet up. I mean, just think of Zenib and Cole, right? They totally fell in love in the pods. It's hard to imagine that, but they totally fell in love with each other in the pods, and they were giddy with excitement about getting married. And then they meet each other, and the first morning, it was just like complete disaster, and they never were able to get back to where they were. The rest of their relationship really depends on that first couple days, maybe even that first day, that first 24 hours of being reunited. And if it doesn't go well, you can just imagine someone being like, oh my God, I've made a terrible mistake. And I think that might be happening for Taylor. And maybe it happened for JP. Maybe he made that decision earlier on.
And I was like, do you not care? I'm confused. He just brushes it under the rug like it's nothing. Do you think that you could sleep with me for the rest of your life?
I don't.
Yeah, her face is exactly my face. What is happening here? Is it some sort of immaturity? I don't know. And then you wonder if you're in Taylor's mind, you're thinking, okay, what really happened in the pods? Because maybe JP was always kind of like this, or maybe not this bad, but maybe he was always kind of like this. But because it was in the pods, I just inserted this fantasy about who JP was. But if I really look back, he didn't say much back then. But of course he did. He did talk more than this anyway. And then the other thing to think about is maybe JP is always like this, like we see in person, but when he entered the pods, he felt freer to talk. So, maybe if you could engineer, if I were Taylor's friend, I would say how about you, put yourself in the bathroom and put him outside of the bathroom and, close the door and have a conversation through the door. Maybe, who knows? Maybe that can help. And we can use this as a jumping off point. In the beginning, when texting first came out in the aughts, I remember hearing about couples or friends that would text a lot with each other about intimate things that they might not talk about in person. And I thought at first that was some kind of a problem. But over time, working with couples, I have come to realize that, look, you got to do what you got to do. And talking about tense or potentially conflictual topics can be really anxiety provoking, especially for some folks, and triggering, right? And if texting or emailing or voicemailing each other is a safer way to communicate, because when we feel unsafe, our anxiety and distress goes up and all of our defenses start to kick in. Our anger or defensiveness or shutting down or accusations or hostility or vulnerability to being triggered and angry at someone and, cascading conflict spinning out of control is much more likely when we feel unsafe. And for some folks, it's much safer for them to receive a text or an email, have a reaction with no pressure to say anything, think about it, and then type out a response. And it can be a much healthier exchange in that way. It lacks the in-person, three-dimensional intimacy, but, communication is communication, right? And do what you got to do. And if that works for folks, and if you're comfortable in that zone. So, yeah, I've done it. So I wonder if JP is just one of those folks that in-person communication is just really threatening to him for some reason.
It was nice.
It was nice.
Another possibility that I'll throw out is that he is terribly insecure. And when he was in the pods, when no one could see him and everything was just verbal, he felt safe. He felt like he could be valued and loved. Once he's in person, I'm just throwing it out there, I don't know. But it's possible that when he met her, he thought, oh, she's pretty and she'll never love me. And because of his schemas or his trauma that he's been through, he's just like, she's going to hate me. There's no point. Because we don't know. I think the assumption that I have with a lot of these folks is that, well, the sort of person that goes on a reality TV show and is able to, because for me, if I was on a show like this, even today with, however much confidence I have now, but particularly back then when I was younger, I would have been a nervous wreck. I would have been fumbling over my words. I would have just been out of my mind with anxiety and insecurity. And I just always figure, well, these folks, it's not like they're not insecure, but I think my stereotype of these folks, my assumption, is that they're all socially extroverted and able with social skills. But that's not necessarily true, right? You can be chosen to be on these shows for a variety of reasons. So, and maybe JP has a really hard time socializing with anyone, which of course would lead one to have trouble with dating and maybe sign up for a reality TV show. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it was nice.
Off my back, I've been carrying the weight of the world. I'm not just a little girl.
Yeah, I feel bad for her. I mean, I'm sure JP, unless JP is just being a dick, which isn't usually, and that usually is the assumption. Whenever you talk to shy people, socially anxious people, they often will say how often they're misunderstood, that they are terrified, so they're just awkward and they don't know what to say. And the default assumption about them is that they're stuck up. Do people still say that, stuck up? Meaning that they are full of themselves and they're aloof and they're above everybody. And it's quite the opposite for these folks. They feel terrified and they just want to be left alone and they hope that they don't come across poorly to other people. So unless JP is being a dick, then it's not JP's fault, so to speak. And she's suffering though, right? And she's, for me, when I watch the show, sometimes I have to remind myself, no, these folks, for that week, when they're 10 days or whatever, when they're in the pods, and all the preceding months leading up to it, all the hopes and dreams for a lot of these folks, people will say, some of these people go on the show and that, they're just on it for clout. They're not really there to meet someone. Think of your Irina's, maybe. I don't want to accuse her of anything, but it's possible. Certainly people said that about Micah, and it doesn't look that way. With Micah, she either was legitimately into, what's his name? I forget his name. You know who I'm talking about, right? Micah, and, I could see his face, scientist, robot talker. Anyway, so she was either legit into him, which it seemed like she was, or she is a very good long con artist in that she has been consistent with her pursuing of him, right? So, maybe she was kind of on the fence at the altar. Anyway, so, you just think that a lot of these folks, Taylor seems like a good candidate for that for months now, she's been like, I can't wait to go on that show where they actually meet their husbands and live the rest of their lives together and have kids and live the dream. What a wonderful thing. And then you go on the show and you vet 15 different dudes and you meet one and you think he's the guy and it's a proposal, it's all magical, oh my God. And then you meet him and it's just like this blank thing. Either, obviously, you'd just be completely hurt by that, whatever's happening with JB. Also, just complete the grief and loss. And for us, it's just like, well, you met him literally a week or two ago. What's the big deal? But for them, it's a lot of emotion and meaning and intensity just crammed in. It's probably like a year or two of a relationship crammed in a sense, into a small space, emotionally anyway. And yeah, just that disillusionment and then feeling like a fool, maybe even feeling like, so this is going to be published on Netflix, me talking to, everyone's going to think I'm an idiot or that I'm a rejectable, terrible, ugly, disgusting person. That's another conclusion she could come to, is just like, so does he think that I'm disgusting? Is that like, because when we met, everything changed. So the only difference is he finally saw me. So he must be disgusted by me, right? It wouldn't be uncommon for someone to think that. I doubt that, but maybe. But I don't think that's what it is.
Sorry. Feel frustrated. Like anxious and like I made the wrong decision.
Right. And then she might be thinking, well, there was that other guy in the pods who was a lot more talkative, and where's he at? Maybe did I completely pass up my one and only?
I hate being forced to make conversation.
You can pretend there's a wall between us if you want to.
Okay, so he said, I hate being forced to have a conversation. Okay, so I hadn't considered that because I'm not like that. But let's recognize that some people are. For better, for worse, but maybe in JP's perfect world, he lives in a talkless marriage and talkless relationships, conversation-less relationships where you just grunt at each other. And for him, maybe that's perfect. Maybe that's the promised land for him. And we would have to consider that that's okay. It's certainly not relatable. I can't imagine, and I wouldn't want to be with someone like that, and I could never be like that. But conceivably, right, that is possible. It's also quite possible that someone deep down does want to conversate, but because of trauma or toxic masculinity or something, they consider stoicism and quiet to be the ultimate goal of your gender or of life or of people. People don't do this so much anymore, but when I was growing up, there was a lot of stereotyping around women. Chat, gossip. That was the stereotype. It's like, women, they just get together, there's a chat. And I remember absorbing that, but then starting to, I think it's because I'm half Asian in a white world where I grew up, I would hear things about Japanese or Asian people or just non-white people, and I would say, you're wrong about that. What else is society wrong about? I don't know if that's exactly true, but at an early age, I remember being skeptical about stereotypes in general. And I remember when I was young, I would observe men and women because there seemed to be this premise, this rule or this law of nature that women gossip and men are like gruff and they get things done and they just sit stoically and they don't get emotional. And I don't know if this is the context, but in my head it was like Thanksgiving. It was always all the women were in the kitchen and all the men were watching football in the TV room or the living room. And even as a teenager, I just felt like there's something wrong with this. It doesn't feel right. And so I would hang out in the kitchen as well as, the living room. And I just liked both places. I enjoy my sister and my mom and my aunties and my cousins. But anyway, I might have been in that situation where I would go into the kitchen and there was a lot of talking and a lot of laughing, borderlining on cackling. There is my sister, my older sister, and my mom and my auntie Carol laugh very loudly. my Japanese auntie, there's a lot of very loud laughter on both sides of my family, really. And then I would go into the living room and watch football. And yes, there too, there's a lot of talking. It's just maybe about slightly different things, but maybe not. And maybe the laughter isn't as loud, but it's still there. And so I concluded that men talk just as much as women do. So what's this stereotype about? And it's because it's the ideal. It's this ideal of the best man needs to be as anti-woman as possible. It needs to be, women are emotional, and so therefore they probably talk about things. They want to talk, because I think where the stereotype comes from is that, you socialize two groups of people differently. You socialize boys to not talk and to stuff their feelings and to drink or to work themselves to death. And then you socialize women to constantly want to please men all the time and to allow them to some extent to have their emotions. Then you put them together in heterosexual relationships and you have an experience where the woman has to carry all the burden. Think about like chores that you divvy up. Like, okay, you'll do the bathrooms and I'll do the kitchen. Well, the women had the chore of having to engage in the relationship and talk about their feelings and to alert about fears and about intimacy, And so because it's her job and she hasn't been beaten down, completely in that way like the man has, then she will alert, whereas he will shut down. And then in conflicts, there will be this experience where she will be nagging him and he will just be like, get away from me, because he doesn't have any equipment. He doesn't know what to do with it. He's completely out of his element. What's that from? You're out of your element, Donnie. And so it works out. And then the men get together and they're like, oh, my wife, all she wants to do is talk all the time. Just talk, nag, nag, nag. And then it translates into this general stereotype that women talk a lot and men don't. So where was I going with this? So it's possible that for JP, he has some markers. I won't talk about specifics, but maybe I will eventually. I can't tell. But he has some yellow flags of someone who comes from an echo chamber that might ascribe to a particular set of toxic masculine ideas that not only have they absorbed from culture, but even when they're alerted to the fact that there are positive masculine traits and toxic masculine, just like there are positive feminine traits and toxic feminine traits, that these folks, given their echo chamber, will lean in to toxic masculinity because they're trying to own the libs, or it's possible. I'm just throwing it out there. My top hypothesis with JP is that he's terrified of something, and he's so terrified that he can't talk at all, and he is just trying to survive. That's the way it looks to me.
If you don't snore. Just kidding.
Okay, I'm going to rewind that because I think that might actually be in that camp. I'll stop yammering so much. Let's watch.
I hate being forced to make conversation.
You can pretend there's a wall between us if you want to.
Can you sleep next to me for the rest of your life?
I will say that Taylor is amazing at this. Isn't she a kindergarten teacher? Am I remembering that? Let me look at my notes. Yeah, right. She teaches kindergarten. So she is perhaps the perfect person to be a kindergarten teacher. So my mom had a daycare throughout my entire childhood, most of my childhood, in our home. So I would wake up in the morning with kids already in the house, right outside my door. The kids would take naps in my bedroom. And I would come home from school and all the kids would be there. And in our house, although I would say it's sort of mid-size house, it wasn't a giant house and it wasn't a small house, but and my bedroom was in the basement, which was where the main playroom was for the kids. Anyway, so I observed my mom, which, isn't that far off from kindergarten teacher, because primarily her kids were about 3 or 4 years old. I observed my mom and the mastery it took to manage and to attune to 10 children all by herself and feed them and keep them safe and keep them entertained. To be a kindergarten teacher or daycare runner, you have to be very good at putting your ego aside and being very accommodating to people, So I wonder if for Taylor, she is suited for that or has learned how to be that way. And so, because you just imagine if it was Stacy in, just imagine that. Stacy is with JP and how quickly she would become vocal to him and critical to him, which I think is justified. But anyway, Taylor is just being really great. But anyway, that question that JP asks is, so do you think you could sleep with me for the rest of your life? I wonder, and he's saying it with a smile, but I wonder if what was happening is, she's trying to reach out, right? She's like, it's a bid, essentially. Okay, we can use a jumping off point right here. When we have a need that emerges for us of connection, love, loyalty, dedication. We are looking for that attachment, security, and we notice it or we don't notice it, but it'll give us a feeling of longing, of sadness, or of maybe optimism, like, well, if I bid for attention here, I'll get it, and I need that. Often when we say I love you, it is both an expression and also a hope that we'll get it back. When we kiss someone, we're hoping it's a mutual thing. So I think for her, understandably, she's starting to have a lot of questions, and she would have questions about that anyway. So then she asks, not directly, but it's pretty direct, right? Do you want to sleep next, to me for the rest of my life, for the rest of our lives? So he hears that, and even though it's pretty obvious what she's asking, really what she's asking is, do you still love me? Do you even like me? And he doesn't hear that because I think he's drowning in his own anxiety and insecurity that he's just like, well, do you want to sleep next to me?
If you don't snore. Just kidding.
I will say he has a lot of eye contact, so that's a plus. He keeps looking at her. So I'll throw in this other, I'm just throwing out hypotheses. For some people, their anxiety socially, maybe speaking-wise, is so significant that they actually will have a somatic, a bodily reaction when they are being pressured to talk or when they want to say something but they're unsure about what to say. Their throat, their larynx, the muscles will literally freeze up or close. Not close the airway, but there will be a freezing of the mechanisms necessary to speak. Maybe even a freezing of the diaphragm as they start to talk. It goes, and they literally can't get the words out. They're so terrified with fear, particularly around speaking, that, and this is a good opportunity to talk about all the various different schemas. Listen to all my deep dives on schema therapy. It is a kind of a game changer for me anyway. I had been following the basic premises of schema therapy with object relations and interjects and internalizations and recreations and all that sort of stuff. But what schema therapy did was, by Jeffrey Young, him and his colleagues developed this system of categorizing different belief systems that are derived from our early childhood and relational trauma. So if, for some people, when they spoke or they expressed themselves spontaneously, so think of a 3-year-old that cries or is joyful or is kind of frustrated and angry, and generally speaking, or enough of the time, there is a very harsh reaction from a parent that shuts it down. So the child neurologically will learn to not be spontaneous. And a lot of emotion, not only noticing of ourselves, but expression depends on spontaneity, whether, of course, laughter or joy or smiling or, nodding your head as someone else is talking or wanting to interject. Not only that, but also tears and love making and, all that stuff. It requires in the moment. You can't think about it. You have to be just in the flow and just do it, right? But in order to do that, you have to feel safe, and you have to not have this neurological barrier that was developed earlier in life. And so for these folks, it's a schema of non-spontaneity, if you will. And it has to do with not only emotion, but with just doing anything spontaneous. They just run into this barrier, they just freeze because they know something bad is going to happen. There's something very scary about it, but it's so pre-verbal to them that they don't even know that it's happening. They just shut down. And when you ask them even later, it's like, so you shut down? They're like, no, I didn't, because it's out of awareness for them. So that's another possibility because he keeps looking at her. You'd think if you just completely hated someone, you'd just be like, he's looking at her like a puppy dog. He has that look to him that he's hoping for something. At least that's my interpretation. What's yours?
Can you sleep next to me for the rest of your life?
If you don't snore. Just kidding.
Do you know what I mean? Like, that doesn't match up with he hates her. That doesn't match up with I'm not attracted to her. That kind of looks like a child that's just like, do you like me? Other people in his shoes, if they truly were trying to blow her off, they would walk around, or they might make chit chat of just like, yeah, well, maybe it'd be good to go to the beach today, or I think I'll go work out by myself, that sort of thing. There's a better way to blow someone off, right? And we've seen it before on the show, I think. And he's just staring at her, just like, yeah, I don't like to be pressured to talk. It's a different vibe than just purely being a dick about it or not being attracted to her. All right, well, I want to remind everyone that if you want to participate in the polls on YouTube, where I will poll people like, what should I do next? You have to potentially go to the community tab every now and then, because you might not see it in your feed necessarily. I don't know exactly how that works, but just a little reminder there. And everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.